Mansa Musa, the king who broke an economy with kindness. 1324 CE. While Europe's kings are bankrupting themselves, fighting over scraps of land, a West African emperor named Mansa Musa stands in Cairo with enough gold to buy the entire city. He's just traveled 3,000 miles across the Sahara with 60,000 people and 80 camels, each one carrying 300 pounds of pure gold. He's here to prove his devotion to God by making pilgrimage to Mecca. But his generosity is about to trigger an economic catastrophe that will ripple across 3 continents for over a decade. Here's his impossible choice: keep the gold and dishonor his faith, or give it away and destroy an economy. He chose faith. And what happened next reveals something profound about what happens when unimaginable wealth meets unshakable belief, and why medieval Africa's golden age was built on ideas, not just gold. Palace in Niani, 1324. Musa's advisors watch him plan the pilgrimage. "Your Majesty, you're taking 60,000 people across the Sahara. Our empire produces half the world's gold. But even we can't afford to give it all away in Cairo." Musa looks up from the maps. "The Quran commands generosity. We control the gold mines. We control the salt routes. God gave us this wealth to test us. I intend to pass that test. And if Cairo's economy collapses, then the poor will have gold to rebuild it." His advisors exchange glances. They can see the disaster coming, but you don't argue with an emperor who thinks God is on his side. So the caravan departs. 60,000 people, soldiers, officials, griots singing the emperor's praises, scholars, merchants hoping to make connections, enslaved people carrying supplies. 80 camels loaded with gold. The journey across the Sahara takes months. They follow ancient trade routes marked by the bones of those who didn't make it. Temperatures swing from scorching days to freezing nights. Water sources are calculated to the drop. But Musa travels in style: silk tents, elaborate ceremonies at each stop. And at every settlement, every oasis, every town along the way, he gives away gold. To the poor, to local rulers, to mosque builders. He's fulfilling his religious duty, purifying his wealth through generosity. Word spreads ahead of them. The richest king in the world is coming, and he's giving away gold like it's sand. By the time they reach Cairo, the economic heart of the medieval world, the entire city is buzzing. Now here's where everything starts to unravel. Musa enters Cairo in July 1324 with a spectacle that would make European kings weep with envy. Golden staffs, silk banners, an entourage that takes hours to pass through the city gates. And then he starts giving away gold. Not strategically, not carefully measured amounts. He's handing out gold to beggars in the street, buying goods at massive markups because he doesn't care about the price, donating to mosques and madrasas, leaving golden tips that are worth more than the merchants' entire inventories. Within days, something strange happens in Cairo's markets. A loaf of bread that cost 1 silver dirham last week now costs 3. A bolt of cloth doubles in price overnight. Merchants are raising prices because suddenly everyone has gold. So gold itself becomes less valuable. This is what economists call monetary inflation. When you flood an economy with currency without increasing the goods and services available, each unit of currency becomes worth less. Musa just gave Cairo's economy a massive injection of gold, roughly 24,000 pounds of it, without increasing the food supply, the housing stock, or the number of craftsmen. The poor he was trying to help? They're watching their gold lose value as prices skyrocket. At first, Musa doesn't notice. He's busy being pious, praying at mosques, meeting with scholars, preparing for the final leg to Mecca. But his advisors notice, and more importantly, Cairo's merchants notice. Within weeks, the inflation is severe. Prices have tripled. The Egyptian economy is in chaos. And it's not just Cairo. The effects are spreading along trade routes. Because Cairo is a trade hub connecting Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, the inflation ripples outward like waves from a stone thrown in a pond. Goods from Cairo become more expensive in Damascus, in Constantinople, in Venice. Merchants who'd already contracted prices are losing money. New contracts are being renegotiated. The medieval economy is interconnected enough that one man's generosity in Cairo causes price shifts across 3 continents. Look, this is an early example of what economists now call monetarist theory of inflation. Money supply increases without corresponding growth in goods and services, causing prices to rise. Mansa Musa accidentally ran a real-world economics experiment, and it was failing catastrophically. Now imagine being Musa when he figures this out. You're the richest man alive. You've just fulfilled your religious duty by giving generously to the poor. You followed God's law perfectly, and you're told that your generosity has impoverished thousands. The same beggars you gave gold to can't afford bread anymore. The mosques you donated to are paying triple for building materials. The scholars you're funding are watching their savings evaporate. Here's the impossible question. If doing the right thing causes suffering, is it still right? Musa believed, genuinely, deeply believed, that giving to the poor honored God. Islamic law commanded it. His faith required it. But his giving had caused harm. Real, measurable, economic harm. So what do you do when your faith and your responsibility are in direct conflict? Most medieval kings would have ignored the problem. Moved on. Let Cairo deal with the mess. But here's what makes Musa interesting. He tried to fix it. He went to Cairo's moneylenders and did something unprecedented for a medieval king. He borrowed gold back at interest. Think about this. The richest man in the world, borrowing money to take gold out of circulation, trying to stabilize an economy he destabilized through generosity. He borrowed at high interest rates, rates that would make European kings balk. But Musa didn't care about the cost. He cared about fixing his mistake. Here's the thing though, it partially worked and partially made things worse. Taking gold out of circulation did slow the inflation. But then when Musa repaid the loans with interest, he put even more gold back into the system. The economy swung from inflation to deflation and back again. Cairo's economy would take over a decade to fully stabilize. But Musa couldn't stay. He had a pilgrimage to complete. Faith required him to reach Mecca. So here's the second impossible choice Musa faced. Stay in Cairo and manage the economic crisis he caused, or continue to Mecca and complete his religious duty. He chose faith, again. And honestly, maybe that tells us everything we need to know about what medieval Africa valued. In Europe, kings were pragmatic to the point of cynicism. They'd break oaths, betray allies, abandon obligations if it served their interests. Musa had a chance to be pragmatic, to put economic stability over religious duty, to fix his mistake before moving on. He chose faith instead, even knowing the cost. The pilgrimage to Mecca was completed. Musa prayed at the Kaaba. He met scholars from across the Islamic world. He made connections with theologians, architects, mathematicians. And on the return journey, something shifted in his thinking. He couldn't undo the economic damage, but he could build something lasting with his remaining wealth. He recruited scholars to return with him to Mali. He hired Es-Saheli, an architect from Granada, to design mosques and buildings. He purchased books on Islamic law, mathematics, astronomy. He spoke with university scholars about curriculum and teaching methods. Musa was returning to Mali with an idea: transform Timbuktu from a trading post into an intellectual center. If he couldn't be remembered for generosity without consequences, he'd be remembered for what he built. But wait, here's what the simplified histories miss. When Musa returned to Mali with Muslim scholars and architects, not everyone was thrilled. Mali had traditional power structures, griots who preserved oral history, local religious leaders who practiced indigenous African religions alongside Islam, chiefs who'd held authority for generations. And here comes Musa with foreign scholars, new architectural styles, and plans to make Islam the empire's dominant cultural force. There was resistance, court officials who saw their influence waning, traditional religious leaders who feared displacement, regional governors who preferred the old ways. Musa had to fight for his vision, not with swords, but with patronage, persuasion, and political maneuvering. Here's what he did. He didn't replace traditional structures. He integrated them. Griots became chroniclers of Islamic history alongside traditional stories. Local leaders were given roles in the new mosques and madrasas. The transformation was gradual, negotiated, culturally sensitive. This wasn't conquest, it was synthesis. And it worked. Timbuktu transformed. The Sankore Mosque became a university attracting scholars from across the Islamic world. Students came from Egypt, from Morocco, from as far as Persia, to study at Timbuktu. They studied astronomy, tracking Venus and Mars with precision that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. Mathematics, including algebra and geometry, Islamic law, the Maliki school of jurisprudence became Timbuktu's specialty. Medicine, literature, philosophy. By Musa's death around 1337, Timbuktu had become one of the world's great intellectual centers. Here's the comparison that should blow your mind. While European universities were primarily teaching theology and debating how many angels could dance on a pin, Timbuktu's scholars were calculating planetary movements, writing sophisticated legal treatises, and advancing medical knowledge. The Mali Empire under Musa became proof that Africa wasn't just rich in resources, it was rich in ideas. But here's the deeper thing about Musa's legacy. He could have been remembered as the richest man who ever lived. That title alone would have echoed through history. Instead, he chose to be remembered for what he built with that wealth. So let's zoom out. What are we actually talking about here? Mansa Musa faced impossible choices at every turn. Faith versus economic responsibility, generosity versus wisdom, tradition versus transformation. And at each choice point, he chose faith, even when it caused harm, even when it was difficult, even when pragmatism would have been easier. Here's the question that haunts me. What would you choose to be remembered for? What you owned or what you built? Musa had enough gold to be remembered forever as the wealthiest king in history. Some estimates put his wealth at $400 billion in today's money, more than Jeff Bezos, more than Elon Musk, more than anyone. But he spent it on buildings that would crumble, on scholars who would die, on books that would eventually burn when Timbuktu was sacked in later centuries. And yet, here's the thing, we're still talking about him 700 years later. Not because of the gold, because of Timbuktu, because of what he built. The libraries are gone. The Sankore University declined after the empire fell. The architectural achievements were destroyed or eroded. But the idea that Africa was a center of intellectual achievement, that wealth could be used to build knowledge, that faith could drive cultural transformation, that idea survived. Medieval Africa wasn't waiting for Europe to discover it. It was thriving, building, thinking, creating intellectual traditions that rivaled anything in the medieval world. The Mali Empire produced half the world's gold, but its real treasure was knowledge. Timbuktu's scholars were advancing mathematics while European monks were copying Latin texts. Mali's trade networks connected 3 continents while European kingdoms squabbled over provincial territories. And at the center of it all was one man who made an impossible choice. He chose faith over pragmatism, generosity over wisdom, and ultimately legacy over wealth. Did he make mistakes? Absolutely. The Cairo inflation crisis was a disaster of good intentions, but here's what matters. He tried to fix it. He tried to build something lasting. He tried to use his wealth for something beyond himself. That's not just medieval history. That's a question we're still wrestling with today. What do you do with power? With wealth? With privilege? Mansa Musa's answer was, you build, you create, you transform. And maybe that's why his story still resonates 700 years later. This is episode 4 of What the World Was Doing During Europe's Middle Ages, where we're exploring what the medieval world was actually doing while Europe stumbled through the Dark Ages. We've covered China's Song Dynasty, a technological revolution Europe wouldn't match for centuries, Islam's House of Wisdom, where scholars preserved and advanced human knowledge while European libraries burned, India's mathematical golden age, the birthplace of zero and the number system you use every day, and now Mali, an empire that turned gold into knowledge. Next up, the Maya. While Europe was building Gothic cathedrals, the Maya were tracking Venus with astronomical precision that wouldn't be matched until the telescope was invented. But their post-classic period had a dark secret that modern archaeology is only now uncovering. If you want to see what the rest of the medieval world was really doing, hit subscribe and drop a comment. If you had Mansa Musa's wealth, what would you build? See you in the next one.